do the hello and welcome to Wrestling and Everything Coast to Coast with the hosts, Buddy Sotelo Esquire, Mike Leno, Dr. Mike Leno, and we have our guests on tonight, the regular guests that as regular as you can get on this show, Jonathan Schwartz and, of course, Evan Ginzburg. Welcome and happy holidays to you guys.
How are you?
Happy holidays, everybody.
Happy holidays,
I mean, they're regular guest co-hosts. I just want to start the show because I had it at the top of my list. I stupidly forgot the last time we did it, and Evan wisely brought it up later on the passing of Dory DeQuatro, our mutual friend, the guy I shot with at a bunch of Japanese wrestling shows, January of 1991. We also lost Bob Mulrenin. I've got, I'll have to send Evan that obituary. I've got it up on Slam on Bob, but another guy. But this Bob was a photographer since the late 70s at WWF TV and almost everything. He was super important, particularly in Impact, doing like lots of the photo shoots for the PR end of things for the men and women in particular. Everybody knew him. But Dory DeQuatro, Evan and I shared a great friendship. I just wanted to do him right. I know Russ and Jonathan may not have heard of Dory or Bob Mulrenin, but Ev, was I right? Did Dory and his New York City swing band, did they play at your wedding?
Yes. And Dory said to me that night, he said, "I'm not taking any money. This is my wedding present to you. You know, just take care of the boys." And I got this world-class wedding band, like, for next to nothing. I don't want to go into the finances and bore people, but that's just the kind of guy he was. And he was a great musician. He was a screenwriter. He was working on a script about Sputnik Monroe, integrating wrestling in the South. And, he put a lot of time and effort into it. So I hope we can still do something with that in some capacity. I was working with him and as well as others, and just a good guy, man.
And his wife, Michelle, I mean, she went with us and put up with all the wrestling in Japan. And that was during what's called New Year's week. It's not a New Year's Day like I think it's true in Canada, where it's like a one-day thing. No, it's at least a week holiday, and people go to wrestling shows all week long. And I was photographing with Dory and Michelle DeQuatro, minimum 3 shows a day, a morning, like a 10 o'clock show, an afternoon. The evening show would be either New Japan or FMW or JWP or War, Tenryu's War in Osaka. We took a bullet train together to get to that Osaka show. Dory was just an incredible friend to both Evan and I and anybody that knew him in music or wrestling.
Yeah, let me just say one thing. He was like the most positive, optimistic guy you'd ever want to meet, whereas myself, I could be negative at times, particularly about today's wrestling. But Dory was just this really
negative. What a shocker!
Yeah, Dory was just this upbeat, fun-loving guy, just a giver, just a good person. And yeah, this one really hurt. So
they both went from cancer. So I'm sure, and I asked Bob Mulren's sister, who I kept in touch with, texting and everything, and he didn't want a service or anything like that. So I said, "Is there any charity?" And I think if you give in either, if you knew Dory or Bob Mulrenin, Dory DeQuatro, Bob Mulrenin, or you care to donate to any cancer charity of your choice, just maybe say it's in their name, Dory DeQuatro.
Well, I'll take it a step further. Somebody like Dory, you could give to a music charity like Music Maker for, these old blues musicians who have nothing. I support that charity. I think Dory would like that as well because, musician, it's not easy being a musician. He had a top-notch wedding band. He actually did quite well, but the average musician struggles. It's not, you see these guys, these big stars. That's a whole different thing. the average indie musician is, juggling a day job and, gigs at night or weekends. It's a tough road.
Like wrestlers, that's definitely true. And yeah, both of them were a blast to be around. Always had a lot of fun with both guys. Bob, I room with a lot during these WrestleMania weeks, and he'd be up all night. Dory was a craftsman, and so was Bob. I'd go, we'd get back to the room at like 1 o'clock after doing all the stuff you had to shoot all day, and he'd stay up all night. I go, I got to get some sleep. And he would go over all his photos, do them in Photoshop, send them to wrestlingfigs.com, wherever they had to go. And he might get 45 minutes sleep like at 7 in the morning, when I'd be finally getting up to go do everything else. So just really wanted to salute both Dory DeQuatro, Bob Mulrenan, two great friends. Evan, want to add anything else?
Yes. Jonathan writes for Slam Wrestling. And I just want to acknowledge Slam because they're one of the few sites that will write an obit on a wrestling journalist, a wrestling historian, an indie wrestler. Meanwhile, the vast majority of these sites out there, some of whom are making big money, they'll give like one sentence to like a wrestler or a journalist dying, if that, and then they'll move on to like the 10,000 words on some meaningless Raw episode. I think it's great that Slam actually acknowledges, people in the business that pass. I mean, if you added up the hours that some of these indie wrestlers, indie wrestling writers, journalists, historians put into this, many times for no money whatsoever. I mean, nobody's getting rich off of wrestling books except maybe the WWE. So, it's a credit to sites like Slam and to Wrestling and Everything. This broadcast, how many episodes you have, Russ?
We're we're at 143, I think, tonight.
143.
Never missed a week. Have not missed a week.
243, no? 143?
Yeah, I'm trying to build up a Roman Reigns kind of unbeaten streak here.
143. So probably half of those have had us acknowledging people that died, unfortunately.
Yeah, and in that same vein, and I'm sorry to step on you, Jonathan. We will let you actually have something to say here, but last week was the 11th anniversary of the death of Mark Bison Smith. And at least on this program, he does deserve an extra mention. We did a year ago a very special show where you interviewed me for an hour about the passing of Mark, but I just wouldn't feel right if I didn't say something even on this show acknowledging the passing of him. He was such a good friend, and through this show, I've been able to get in touch with his mother, and that was something that meant a lot to me. So I've been able to send her a lot of original photos and some videos that she'd never seen of Mark in action. And
the Bay Area, Russ, NorCal?
I'm sorry?
Where does she live?
No, they're in Colorado. I'm sorry, they're in Fresno. They're in Fresno.
Oh,
so
okay.
Who knows whether that's NorCal or SoCal. I think Fresno, Bakersfield, and Modesto keep California in one piece because neither Northern California nor Southern California want to accept any of those cities. So they say, we have to keep California.
That's the farmland. And Bison Mark Smith, again, broke in at APW, then wrestled for Iron, and of course Noah Japan with Mike Modest, Donovan Morgan. Donovan, who you got him on the show, and we had him now twice.
Yeah.
Last one.
And he also wrestled in Puerto Rico and Japan and was fantastic for Ring of Honor. And I just want to give one other quick memorial to the passing of Monty and the Pharaohs YouTube show. And I'm glad that's one thing I am glad to see dead and buried. And I hope that they put it in like the same, like take all the videos and put them in the same place that they stored all those Atari ET cartridges that they buried out in the desert in a toxic waste dump, because that's where that stuff belongs. And by the way, Monty, fuck you. I'd like to just give a quick shout out. Fuck you and the horse you rode in on. Thank you very much. We can continue. Okay.
The opinions of the rest, those might not reflect the rest of us. Not that.
No, but it completely reflects my feelings about Monty. He shouted out me on his show.
Some kind of backstory here.
I'm sorry,
Jonathan. Wait, let's let Jonathan have his say here.
Yeah. I was just going to say, I suspect there might be some kind of backstory here, but
yeah, there is. And he took his time out of his last show to bash me and Evan personally. So I'd like to personally take time out of my show to bash him completely. One of the two shows is still on the air, and the other one is dead and buried.
A receipt. Let me get to a little humor here. We're on some heavy topics. I'm watching with family the Mickey Saves Christmas on ABC. I'm sure they're going to get it. You know, it's a Disney nonstop propaganda thing on ABC. I'm sure Jonathan's going to get it up in Canada, probably at 7. Well, right now. But anyway, I'm looking at the credits and voicing some of the, you know, where they do the voice credits. Somebody named Cameron Grimes. Now it can't be NXT's, you know, TNA Cameron Grimes, the wrestler, the famous wrestler, but you know, the same spelling and everything. Cameron Grimes doing some voices, non-specific voice work.
Maybe it is. Who knows?
Yeah, you never know. And I want to ask, I've asked Jonathan this privately, but this is funny because I do watch so-called championship wrestling from Hollywood. It's never, ever been filmed in Hollywood, but they have a wrestler who's famous in Ring of Honor, and he's had some Japan tours. And this is a twofer. So Tyler Bateman, and then there's the famous European wrestler Tyler Bate. So I forget when it was that Tyler Bateman dropped the Tyler from his name. Now he's just simply Bateman. You remember we had the two Kylie Rays, the British NXT Women's longtime champion, Jonathan, terrific wrestler, and the Kaylee Ray, who most people remember from Impact, and I think she's still doing a lot of work in Chicago and other indies. And the more famous Kylie Ray now is Alba Fire in NXT. Jonathan, I've griped to you about this a lot. Similar names. I mean, how can you have two? And the spellings were pretty close. Kylie Ray, slightly different pronunciations, but only in wrestling. You know.
Well, that's why WWE winds up changing everybody's name, so they own the intellectual property that's associated with it. And then when Alba Fire wants to go back on the indie scene eventually, whenever her career with NXT or WWE comes to an end, then she has to either come up with a third name for herself or hope that she's got enough goodwill locked up in her original wrestling name that when she leaves Alba Fire behind, she can still make a living pretty easily. One thing that a lot of former WWE wrestlers have done is actually incorporate their character names and legally change their names. The best example I can think of that offhand was Test, if you remember him. His original name, Andrew Martin, young man from Canada, winds up actually changing his name legally to be Andrew Test Martin, so that he can actually use that. He can actually use that stage name whenever he went on to whatever other projects he did.
Ryback actually did the same thing. Marvin Hagler. He actually changed his name legally to Marvelous. Seriously.
And,
I like it.
Also, Joni Lauer changed her name. I guess it was Joni China Doll Lauer. She couldn't get straight China, so it was China Doll with the CHINA spelling, not the Y. But
yeah, because Jonathan and I know that when you can't, if you have a trademark, you can enforce it, but you can't force someone whose actual name is the same as your trademark to not be able to use their full name in advertising, because then, you know, everybody's last name is McDonald would never ever be able to, you know, put out a store or anything like that and call it after themselves. Now, you can't sell hamburgers in competition with McDonald's and make the confusion between the two, but that's why wrestlers are able to sometimes take their name and use it in other feds, even though the main name is trademarked, like China, as you pointed out, but with the Y. But you could call herself Joni China Doll Laurer if she changed her name legally, and the WWE couldn't do anything about that.
What about territory guys, though, that came to WWF, they had prior existing fictitious names. Jimmy Snuka comes to mind. And
Bailey.
Snuka everywhere. No, not Bailey. She wasn't
That's
Bailey.
But that's not her real name.
No, but she never used that prior to WWE.
Oh yeah, no, she didn't.
She used Davina Rose, that was the first name she used when she broke in Northern California. And Davina and Rose were, she told me, the names of her two grandmas. So that was kind of nice. But back to this point, for you guys that are attorneys, this may not be your specific area of law, but say Jimmy Snuka, who's used that name everywhere for decades, and he finally goes to WWF, whatever year it was, 82, and then Vince does all of the stuff. Didn't Vince trademark his name, and then he had to do some finagling or something so he could use it on indies when he left, or made some appearances for WCW around 95 when
sometimes these things are honored in their breach, though. I mean, you have to remember in Jimmy Snuka's case, one, he had been wrestling pretty steadily since the 1970s internationally. He was, when you think of Vince's national expansion in the mid 80s, he was already pegged as a major star. So it wasn't a case where it would have been easy for him to kind of, call him Jungle Jim Ray here, for example. Which it's the same way as until very recently, with a number of independent stars, there was always this tension between guys like, say, AJ Styles, for example, or Adam Cole, who were allowed to bring in their previous characters more or less unchanged, their previous names more or less unchanged, because they were such recognizable names and faces elsewhere, versus someone like Sam Shaw, who got renamed Dexter Lumis. Or Killer Cross goes as Karrion Kross now in WWE.
Yeah, Eli Drake, once he hits the developmental NXT, he's got to be LA Knight, but it still has the three.
And then Max Dupree, briefly.
Oh, yeah, let's forget about that. But the funny thing is, I continually mention on the show, I don't know if I've mentioned it to Jonathan, you remember for the longest time, we're talking at least 10 years ago, Eli Drake was doing the finger thing, Eli Drake, which DMD, Britt Baker, uses with no acknowledgement to him, who was the first guy to do that. She's made it more famous now, and it's not even part of his act so much. It's sort of done half-assed now. But another one that comes to mind too, now, what is the name, the South Korean name that they're giving Mia Yim? She's no longer going to be known as Mia Yim. It's by that other...
Actually, she's back to being Mia Yim.
Is she? Okay, that was a lot of talk about that, and people were going, oh, what were they going to call her? Kashin? I think it was something like that.
I'm not even going to try to pronounce the name because I don't want to do an injustice to it. But part of the issue with it was that it was a nickname that her grandmother had supposedly called her when she was growing up. But it means crazy.
Yeah, that's
so
not...
as a term of endearment, it could be taken one way, but especially given what current climate is, probably not the best idea to rename a character that way.
While we're on this theme, I learned this weekend that there was a wrestler in England who called himself Greg Valentine, but it wasn't Greg Valentine. So imagine that. That takes nerve.
Well,
Evan would probably know this better than anybody. If I remember correctly, there was a whole promotion. I want to say maybe it was like Phil Zacco or somebody like that, who would basically run cards, but he would use names that were just adjacent to Bruno San Martino.
Oh, that's right. Jack Pfeffer. That's the infamous Jack Pfeffer. Not Phil Zacco.
I apologize, Phil Zacco.
Senior. That's okay. That's a guy like Tom Burke's email contains that in there. He's such a Jack Pfeffer expert, being the historian Tom is. Jack Pfeffer was... Well, he was that Korean word that you just talked about. Really insane. There was Budney Rogers, Hobo Brazil, Burn Gag Me. I'm not kidding. He had all of these. And then you go there, and some of them would be talented. Budney Rogers was, for a time, it was Jackie Fargo. And then it was someone else. And Hobo Brazil was Rufus R. Jones. So these are guys that could have stood by whatever name you want to give them instead of copycat names.
But of course, the art of parody allows you a lot of leeway.
That was a parody. That was Jack Pfeffer trying to hoodwink people into coming, thinking they were going to see Bruno.
But he could always argue that they were parodies of the
They
other
came
wrestlers.
out dressed like the originals. It was
That's what a parody's all about, right?
It was the fake. It was like the fake Nash and Hall in WWF days, and people. It was like they would get burned.
Or the second Sin Cara.
Yeah. Oh.
In
Well,
England,
I just saw the Weird Al mockumentary, so I believe a little bit more in parodies now than I ever did.
In England, in the resort towns, when I visited England, my cousin lives there. We went to see these shows, and they actually had guys billed as The Rock, The Undertaker, Mankind, whatever.
The Legion of, and they called it something else, not Doom. But so that you would go there. Yeah, that was really a big deal in the late 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah. So I actually went to one of these shows, and it was interesting because it was these old venues that really had history to it, and the undercards were these great, British guys, the Fit Finlay types, going hold for hold. And then when you got towards the main event, there were these guys copying the WWE guys. And the little kids really thought, this is the Undertaker, this is the Rock. So the Rock is speaking with this Cockney accent, and the hair dye is like dripping down his face. It was absurd, but it was actually fun.
And we all remember the fake Diesel and the fake Razor Ramon that the WWE tried to palm on everybody, because, again, they own the names, they own the characters, but it doesn't mean you own the wrestlers themselves. And everybody saw through that, and that went over like a lead balloon.
Well, what did get over, it was funny, was what did they have? They were trying to make fun of when Hogan first left for Ted Turner. Didn't they have a phony Hogan and a phony...
The Nacho Man.
Yeah, the Nacho Man. What was the Hogan one? Hulk Hogan or something like that?
Something like that.
It was a horrific parody because he looked ancient. It was some scrawny guy, similar to when they brought out Gilbert.
Gilbert, yes.
Music, and it's Dwayne Gilbert or Gilman, I think is real.
Gilbert.
Dwayne Gill.
Yeah, Dwayne Gill. And he comes
who'd been an enhancement guy for the better part of a decade, often working tags with Barry Hardy. He was actually a wrestling Ninja Turtle briefly.
Gilbert was?
Yeah. Dwayne Gill and Barry Hardy.
Hilarious. Well, it's only in wrestling. I mean, you couldn't. Ev might know, or Jonathan. I don't know if any band has ever tried coming out and calling themselves Kiss or something like that in a foreign country and trying to get away with it.
Well, they had a blues musician who took a living blues musician's name. This was pre-internet, Sonny Boy Williamson. So if you go on Wikipedia, it says Sonny Boy Williamson 1 and Sonny Boy Williamson 2 because the one guy took the other guy's name.
So, well, then we just had the death of Gallagher.
Right.
And we have Gallagher and Gallagher 2, his cousin, who looks just like him.
His brother, unless he had a cousin doing it as well. They were both ripping him.
Oh, they were brothers. Okay, he had his brother, Gallagher 2, sometimes come in and substitute for him in performances. And
no, but he was mad. He sued his own brother. The real Gallagher sued his brother. There was real animosity that he was, pulling that. So, but... And then that brings to mind one last thing, and you can go on about that, but Andy Kaufman's Tony Clifton character, there was a bunch of people that played it, from Andy to his famous manager.
Bob Smuda.
Yeah, Bob Smuda, correct. And there was even one other person, and with all the prosthetics and stuff, it was very hard to tell. Let me ask Jonathan, was Andy Kaufman that big in Canada, or was it only like an American goofy thing?
No, we knew Andy Kaufman very well. We got Taxi, for example. We were familiar with his acts on the late night shows, that kind of thing. So he's as much of a household name here as he was there. Obviously, so far as this show goes, the biggest thing with Andy Kaufman was the Jerry Lawler work on the David Letterman show. That
I was there in the audience. I tell the story in my upcoming book. I was in the audience.
In which case, just to square the circle on a conversation I had with Evan briefly on social media earlier today, yes, I have seen My Dinner with Andre, which is notable in part because it inspired Kaufman's later film with Fred Blassie, My Breakfast with Blassie, which I still quote in meetings at work.
Excellent.
His Johnny Legend's sister, Lynn Margulies, who I knew well because she was going to school, Evan. You remember where my dental building was at 450 Sutter? Next door was the San Francisco Academy of Art. That's where Lynn Margulies went to school for art. But she was the producer of Breakfast with Blassie, along with her brother, Johnny Legend, who did the initially prior to that movie, and then the I'm From Hollywood.
And now it's out of business. And also, if you
produced the Blassie record that was on Dr. Demento, I think starting in 73, 74. And it was I've got several versions of it, but basically there was only 4 songs on it.
Yeah, we had the producer on the show. We had the guy who helped produce that record on the show here. So
and people totally forget. I saw on Broadway. It was called T-Neck Tansy and the Venus Flytrap. It was Andy Kaufman on Broadway in a wrestling play, and it closed opening day. And
Debbie Harry talked about that.
Debbie Harry was the co-star on Broadway.
Wow.
But Debbie Harry and Andy produced it together. So Andy was in the play because I never obviously saw it or heard much about it. He was.
It closed opening night. It bombed. But
was Andy in the play, or he just produced her with Debbie?
I believe so. It's so long ago.
Did you
By
go?
the way, have you guys seen the Tales from the Territories with the
those first 2? Those were the best. The first 2 on Memphis, and the very second one was the whole Kaufman thing, which was terrific, I thought.
I just saw it a couple days ago, and it is really good. If you guys, I know you don't have a lot of time. I know between reviewing old Godzilla movies, you don't have time to catch Tales from the Territories.
There's only so much wrestling I could take. Unlike these guys who have no other interest but wrestling. I mean, how much wrestling can you watch after?
Tales from the Territories on Andy Kaufman isn't just about wrestling. It's really about Andy Kaufman.
I'll check it out. I'm just saying sometimes, after watching a 3.5-hour WWE pay-per-view, it's like enough wrestling for the weekend.
Now that's the perfect segue to talk about you and Survivor Series and to get Survivor Series brought in.
Ask Jonathan, though, if he's been watching, or I forget if you were able to get.
I haven't figured. So the YouTube broadcast is blocked where I am.
Really?
So I haven't figured out yet how to get it up here, unless I were to subscribe to Vice, and in which case I'll defer to Evan's comments about there's only so much wrestling stuff I have time.
Oh no, I have. Don't get me wrong. I have every intention of watching it. I enjoy Dark Side of the Ring. It's just, there's other things to watch as well.
We just lost. Here's another one. We lost Irene Cara. She was like 55, 53. Totally young, in the prime of her life. There's no cause of death.
63.
63. Okay.
63.
Still super, super young, and great talent, and particularly obviously in the 80s. And there are some other cool things going on. Like I do not miss, and it's going to replay on HBO, Howard Stern interviewing Bruce Springsteen. It's a 2-hour special. It's such a big deal because I guess Bruce, like Jay Leno for quite years, refused to go on Stern. And since Stern is mellowed, he finally agreed. It was a huge event, and they made a 2-hour thing in association with Sirius XM, so it's a big deal.
Stern actually turned into a decent interviewer.
Yeah, he has. He has a lot of his staff, particularly Garrett Delabate, his producer, do all this research. So he is well prepped when somebody comes in. And, obviously, if it's somebody like Ozzy Osbourne that he already knows A to Z, it's different. But he really does his homework, and he has his staff help him with the homework. And he's probably one of the best interviewers out there. I mean, he was vying and actually pitching to ABC that he should be replacing Barbara Walters to interview these celebrities. And for a time, he had, after his E! Entertainment cable show, he had a late night Saturday interview show that only lasted a couple of months on CBS, maybe a good 15 years ago. That it's a real strong suit for him. And he's mellowed, so he's more palatable. Guest judge or a regular judge for years on America's Got Talent. So, but he has had way more wrestlers than even Letterman ever had, from Mick Foley, Medusa. I mean, he's had tons and tons. Steve Austin many times, Triple H, Rock.
He's responsible for the Iron Sheik's renaissance.
But as the Whack Pack.
Yeah.
There's a whole other story. Some people out there are asking, when they did the second national U.S. I don't know if they went into Canada, but it was called the Ronnie Munn Block Party. I was hired by Shuli Agar to babysit Iron Sheik Cosgrove, just as Evan and I babysat sort of Iron Sheik at that L.A. Burbank Airport celebrity thing. We kind of had to watch him with all those other wrestlers.
I'll tell you a funny Iron Sheik story real quick. So we were at the LA Collectors show, and so coming back from there, I'm on the bus with Nikolai and Iron Sheik and Albano and like the whole crew. So this woman gets on the bus, just a passenger. It's a bus going back to the airport. We're coming back to New York, and I'm coming back to New York. So the woman says, "You're Nikolai Volkov." And Nikolai was like the warmest, wonderful guy. Yes, nice to meet you. You know, what's your name? Blah, blah, blah. So then Nikolai says to the woman, you know, I'd like to introduce you to my partner, the Iron Sheik. So the woman looks at the Iron Sheik and she goes, that's not the Iron Sheik. Because, he didn't look like he did in his prime. And he got really pissed. He was like, you jabroni, get out of here, It was crazy. It was on a public bus going back to the airport.
Evan had such history, though, with Iron Sheik. He went to, where was Sheik living? Was it Charlotte or?
No, he was living in Atlanta near Orndorff and
Abbey
and Holyfield. They all lived in the same area in Atlanta. So I went down there one weekend to try to work on his book, but it never happened. It was just not happening.
Now, at the Burbank thing that you and I were sitting, actually, Greg Valentine was also there, Albano, Nikolai. But remember Cosgrove, Iron Sheik, at some point, and there's all of these, there was a whole row of celebs from Happy Days and from American Graffiti, and Tracy Lords is there, and the kids.
There was silent film stars there.
Yeah, there's tons of.
I don't think Tracy Lords was a silent film star.
No. Yeah.
Not a silent film. But Cosgrove gets up and he starts ranting and using curse words about was it Blair?
Blair.
Oh, F him from behind, make him humble. His routine that he's done first on Opie and Anthony, and then he hit the big leagues when he became part of the Whack Pack later on the Howard Stern show. So, but when they did this Ronnie Munn block party, they had all of the Stern writers like Richard Christie and Sal Governale and Beetlejuice and Gary they call him now the Conqueror, but then he was called Gary the Midget or the Retard and blah, blah, blah. And Cosgrove, to make sure he got there, I had to get him to these, 3 different venues, San Francisco, Sacramento, and LA. And Cos was a lot to handle. And he's had some personal tragedies in his life that, sort of made him kind of the wild man he is now. The caps, anytime you see a tweet. But Evans had more history with him. But those things, are they still?
Nikolai told me he was doing much, much better in recent years.
Good. Are they still doing those celebrity? You don't hardly see them in California. They're a big deal on the East Coast and probably in Canada under Schiller Theater. All of these things with it. You get a whole and Comic-Cons that have tons of them. But it's weird that they'll just include wrestlers. They have a row of wrestlers at a lot of these things with major stars. The thing that we were at, there were some major stars that Evan has been to way more of them. I've only been to 2. Do you know if they're still doing those? And they were
absolutely, like Chiller. See, what people don't understand about these conventions, for the most part, there are exceptions, but for the most part, it's people that need a payday. It's like rock stars that haven't had a hit in decades, and former wrestlers.
There, Lou Ferrigno's always at those things. The female, the blonde who was in both Tron and Caddyshack, who.
I know. I forget her name, but I know who you're talking about.
Beautiful. But she's at all the ones that any ones I've gone to, even the San Francisco.
But Comic-Con. It levels the playing field. You have ex-playmates and ex-boxers and ex-wrestlers and ex-porn queens, and guys who haven't had hit records in forever. I mean, there's exceptions, like the San Diego Comic-Con is a huge deal. And
yeah, they have their fans. I remember Eddie, the kid that played Eddie Munster, whatever his name is, he was, in his way, babysitting. Yeah, he was babysitting Rip Taylor, the comic that passed away a couple of years ago, who was a huge deal on the Gong Show and all of that stuff.
But it's not as glamorous as people think it is. No. They schlep their stuff in. They stagger home after 2 or 3 days. And then they, basically this is how they make a living. They're not getting the bookings they were. They're not getting the work they were for the most part. I mean, again, there's exceptions. But the New York Comic-Con, San Diego Comic-Con, these are big deals, and you get a lot of major current stars. But a lot of them, this is what they do. They hawk their autographs. They hawk their merch. But
Evan, sorry, I was just going to say, Evan actually had a hand in bringing an image of that to the screen. That was one of the really key scenes in The Wrestler. When,
I'll tell you the backstory on that real quick.
Please do.
Yeah. I'm on set that day, and Aronofsky gets, for those who don't know, I was associate producer on The Wrestler. So I'm on set that day, and Aronofsky gets this smirk, and he's like, Evan, come here. And I'm like, yeah. And he goes, I want you to, work the tables, walk up to Mickey last, ask him for an autograph and a Polaroid. So I go, okay. I'm not an actor. Mickey whispers in my ear, just improv it. He has no idea. He thinks I'm an actor. So all of a sudden, I do what Aronofsky says. And, just to tell you where that scene came from, I was at a convention. I took Aronofsky and the screenwriter and the executive producer, the money guy, the executive producer, to a convention. And again, it's like the WWE Hall of Fame. There's Moolah, there's Mae Young, Albano, Nikolai, Sheik, etc. And there's nobody there. There's nobody there. And Aronofsky keeps going, Evan, where is everybody? Where is I go, it's like this sometimes, Darren. It's like this, and because he looked at these guys, because Aronofsky was an 80s wrestling fan. Like to him, these were like huge stars. And so there's Iron Sheik with his head down on the table, sleeping. That's how dead it was at this convention. So in the Wrestler movie, there's Johnny Valiant's head down on the table, sleeping. Or most of that stuff was my merchandise on those tables. I actually set it up so it looked realistic. And I'll tell you a backstory that people don't know. So I kept saying to Darren, I said, get Nikolai and Sheik and Albano, get all of them for this scene. It would be perfect. And Darren's like, he's weighing it for like months and months. And finally he goes, no. He goes, Mickey would look like what's wrong with this picture. Because they're the legit guys. So the only actual wrestlers that were there, both of whom were my friends, Manny Yarborough, the sumo, who was in UFC briefly. Yeah. He was an actual sumo, 800 pounds. He was in that scene, and Johnny Valiant. The others were all actors playing wrestlers. And there I am being tossed into this. So I walk up to Mickey, and I'm improvising it. So I go, what should I say? As I walk up to him, I go, I loved you as a kid. I saw you at the Garden. Can I have your autograph? So then he's improvising it. He goes, what's your name? So I'm thinking for a second. I go, Evan. And it dawns on me how utterly surreal this is. I'm playing myself in a fictional movie. How utterly surreal this is. But Russ has heard this story 40 times. So let's move on to the Survivor Series.
Yes, please. Yeah. I've got it all queued up. I want to talk on some actual wrestling for a second. Not that your movie isn't.
Did you see it, Jonathan?
I did.
Okay. What'd you think?
You know what? I actually want to start with a point that you raised before, just in terms of the hyperbole that goes on with these shows. I have to admit, I agree.
Enlarge the picture, buddy.
Okay.
First off, I was really happy to see War Games in this format. but I have to admit I am an old school diehard 5-on-5 Survivor Series fan. In my mind, there's nothing better than the original card where you had Hogan's team with Bam Bam Bigelow and Ken Patera and The Rock and
totally
Don
agree.
The Rock Morocco.
I totally
was originally
agree.
supposed to be Superstar Graham, who by contract I have to mention at least once an episode.
Yeah.
Against Andre the Giant and King Kong Bundy and those guys. I think the actual best version of that was a couple years later, where they came up with the idea that they would have the survivors of each of the 5-on-5 or 4-on-4 matches come together for a grand finale and fight a second time.
That was awesome.
For me, it's one of the few times where they could, on the one hand, continue working whatever feuds they had going in the background, but take a step away from it and at least kind of introduce some different matchups that you wouldn't necessarily see and give people a little bit better exposure that way. I love War Games as a concept. I love the old NWA versions. To me, this one lacked a little bit just because it felt like the matches themselves were kind of thrown together. I like all the guys. I think the Bloodline is the best stable going today. As you've noted before, there are no 4 horsemen, but I don't think we're going to see a collection of 4 guys who can work and all talk and just kind of be a unit like that again for a long time. But, you know, Sheamus and the Brawling Brutes have been mired in the mid-card forever. Drew McIntyre's had plenty of chances against Roman Reigns and hasn't succeeded. Kevin Owens was off television for a couple months until very recently. So while the potential was there and it was a solid match, and I especially like the story that they wind up telling with Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn particularly, to me it just kind of, you know, the original War Games was meant to settle the score between the 4 Horsemen and the Road Warriors and Dusty Rhodes. And I don't think you get a more heated feud in the 1980s than that. And that was just kind of one more step along the way in terms of really, you know, nothing ever really ends in wrestling, but that was meant to be kind of a finish to a series of really long and bloody conflicts. And I don't, and this wasn't the end of any kind of storyline to me. And so in my mind, it kind of loses something. It's the same way as Hell in a Cell when you have Shawn Michaels and The Undertaker, or The Undertaker and Mick Foley, meant something because the stakes were so cartoonishly high. They merited that kind of like over-the-top kind of presentation. Without the backstory to really justify it, it was a really cool match, but that's all it was. And the women's match didn't even have that kind of backstory to it. I think if you were going to do a War Games match, I don't know how you do it given the intergender factor, but if you wanted to do, you know, Finn Balor and Judgment Day against AJ Styles and, you know, the OC, and, you know, maybe, you know, bring the Gorillas of Destiny in to say hi for a minute, I think that would be an awesome War Games match. That would justify that kind of use of the, as Dusty Rhodes would have said, of the plunder.
Ultimately, I always go back to, was the match itself great? And neither of those War Games matches yesterday were great. They were both solid. They were both worth seeing, but it was really a pimple on the ass of a 4 Horsemen's War Games. And I was at those live, you know, several of them, and it just didn't touch it. And, you know, personally, again, I go back to when we had this conversation a few weeks ago, I want to see Sami Zayn in a great match. I don't particularly care about the storyline. I really, you know, I just want to see the guy have a great match. And this is a main event of a pay-per-view, and it wasn't a great match. It was just a very good match. And the whole show was basically good and very good matches. There was nothing great, nothing awful. It was, as my mother would say, a piece of fluff. The next morning, it basically floated away because there was nothing special that I will remember 6 months or 6 years from now. It was basically killing 3 hours watching a TV show. And to me, a War Games is a brutal, bloody, revenge-themed match with a clear conclusion. This team, beat the other team to a pulp. It wasn't like that. It was what it was. And the rest of the card was nothing special either.
Shouldn't the War Games, now I fast forwarded through it, but it's all bright and shiny, Hunter's version that has to go through, I don't know, the cleansing of the WWE or whatever. So it's their version of it as opposed to, the gritty. I mean, they could have darkened the lights a little bit, made it look grittier. I've heard a lot of complaints about that. And folks at the same time saying Sami Zayn should get MVP for the last 6 months for all of his hard work. I know Evan wanted to see him have a great match.
Where's his great matches?
Well,
great comedy, great promos, great whatever, but I don't see the great matches.
So can I, because I remember that conversation, I just wanted to, I hate to put you on the spot, but I'm curious when we talk about great matches, to me, there's two things that I always ask. First, to you, what does make a great match? When
what makes a great match is you care.
And hang on. And secondly, outside of pay-per-views, where does one even have a chance to see a great match? I mean, I've seen better stuff on the indies than I think I'm ever going to see on Raw or SmackDown outside of the Monday Night Wars, just because the function of the TV shows, the free TV shows, is to drive people to go see the real matches either in person or on pay-per-view. We can argue that the pay-per-views are a letdown in that case, but the system seems rigged, I guess would be a way to put it, against these guys having the kind of matches that I think you're describing. I mean, I know you go to Flair Steamboat often, which is a tremendous match.
How about I go to Cody Rhodes and Seth Rollins not that long ago in WWE, who had a great series of matches where there's wrestling, where you're emotionally involved, where you care about the match, where you care about who wins. You have to care. It's like a movie. If you don't care, then what's the point? I mean,
there's no build-up. There's no storylines that lead to anything where anyone has anything at stake. When you talk about the Flair, Dusty Rhodes, War Games matches, those meant, or Starrcade. Those were things that people look forward to all year long, to see that blow off of that feud. And you don't have that going in the WWE because all these matches are going to be rematched in Raw and SmackDown next week.
They actually said on the show last night that Roman Reigns was in the Survivor Series 10 years ago. They're dragging these guys along for 10 years, and they just continue the soap opera, and it never ends, and it's never resolved. And there were 5 matches yesterday. I didn't care who won any of them. There was no emotional involvement. Okay? So what's a great match? Okay, it's not just Flair and Steamboat. Like I said, it's Seth Rollins and Cody Rhodes. It's Okada. It's Okada and Kenny Omega. I'll take it another step. It was AJ Styles and Nakamura at Wrestle Kingdom, okay? Not at WrestleMania when they watered them down and chopped it to half the length that it was at Wrestle Kingdom. So these WWE wrestlers are more than capable of having great matches. So it's a decision, tone it down, not too violent, no blood.
Yeah.
No. I don't know if I answered your question, but it's therapeutic for me to vent.
No, I'm glad to hear it. I find, I agree that a lot of what I see isn't necessarily what I would want to see in a match. I'm just, maybe so used to tempering expectations when it comes to Raw and SmackDown. NXT's actually had, I think, its share of very good matches. There aren't that many that I would necessarily call great. There
was nothing I considered great on AEW's pay-per-view the week before. There was nothing I considered great. There were several very good matches.
Ed, what about the 6-man? That was pretty close to great.
It was a zillion spots, but I couldn't say I was emotionally invested, that I wanted somebody, desperately to win. I was enjoying the spots. I wouldn't consider that, that wasn't Okada and Omega either, even though Omega was in it.
And the thing is, I agree with Evan that you have to have a pretense for it. You've got to have the feeling that when you watch a pay-per-view, you're seeing something that you would not see on SmackDown and Raw. And there's just so little creativity with SmackDown and Raw. You know that Raw tomorrow is going to feature
not
all
SmackDown.
sorts of...
Everybody is talking up. SmackDown's a far better show week to week than Raw. Raw's been, you're right.
Okay, Raw is going to be everything that you saw at the Survivor Series is going to be it's like leftover Thanksgiving dinner. They're just going to throw it all on a plate and throw it in the microwave and then reserve it back to you. And Thanksgiving should be exciting, right? Because it's a meal you don't get every year. But you know what you get at Survivor Series, which is the same meal out of a can, out of a box, that's been in the freezer. And
well, they've never had a War Games with women before. What did you guys think of the women's match that opened the show?
I think once you start throwing in the trash cans and the tables and they're clunking each other in the head with the trash can lids, I think it cheapened the whole thing. You have a giant cage and 2 rings. Why do you need all the crap in there? So it's ECW light, blood free. I'm watching Asuka and Io, whatever her name is, and I'm like, I want to see these two in a singles match. I don't need all this nonsense going on around it.
Cartoonish.
It was basically cartoonish. And let me just throw in this real quick. For the people who go, oh, Evan just hates WWE. I thought every match on that show yesterday was good or very good. It was just nothing was great. Nothing. So ultimately,
put me in the mediocre camp. I just couldn't get a temperature
liked it less than me.
Or a pulse. I just felt like I was watching the same thing that I would see on SmackDown or Raw, or just what I'd see weekly on AEW. There was just nothing to me that I felt special. And as you've said yourself, I think a month from now, people will forget every single thing. If you ask me what happened in WrestleMania, I couldn't tell you like what the main results are of any of the matches that happened in WrestleMania this year. There's just nothing that stands out, and I haven't felt like the WWE has taken that effort to make everything stand out. By the way, let's give your friend credit for these photographs.
Absolutely. I was just going to say, what is special is the photography of Ryan Persinger, who was at the Survivor Series yesterday and graciously, said I could use his pictures. And this guy's a legit photographer. He doesn't just do wrestling. He does. So Mike would appreciate this as a fellow photographer.
I didn't know somebody had sent these to you. That's
Ryan Persinger, Persinger.
And the nice part is he obviously pays for his own seats because he doesn't. He's not getting ringside for
ringside at these things are $500 plus.
I know it's ridiculous. So I'm glad that he's like the rest of us. He has to pay for his ticket and doesn't get to.
They don't allow any photographers. That's the way it is now. We're all obsolete. Each company, AEW, Impact, WWE, etc., have their own, usually just one, sometimes two, in WWE's case, hired staff photographer. Nobody, not even New Japan, no photographers other than their staffers are allowed to shoot ringside. Before we go, I want to ask a quick question of Jonathan. We've talked about this before, but it really came to a head last Wednesday on Dynamite, is the throwing shade at Thunder Rosa. Now completely telling Jamie Hayter and Toni Storm before her, they were throwing away the interim. You guys were the full champions. They stripped Thunder Rosa of the belt. Jonathan, what do you make of this? Is Thunder Rosa going to return? Is there too much heat between she and Tony Khan? What's going on?
Oh, I think she'll come back. I think she's legitimately been out for a while, and I think one of the things as the promotion's maturing, I think that the idea of having interim champions was at least in theory, not a bad idea. It lends some credibility. They do it in UFC, they do it in boxing, but wrestling isn't UFC and it isn't boxing. And the whole fiction behind why we have all these people going into a ring and hitting each other is ultimately for those championships. I mean, I know going back to Vince Russo, they're dismissed as props, but within the world of wrestling, they mean something. And to just kind of have the real champion on the shelf indefinitely, at some point you just have to move forward. And I think AEW generally has been in a bit of a holding pattern of late. I think between the disruption to the women's division with Thunder Rosa, the disruption that I think we're still seeing ripples coming from it between the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega and CM Punk, and however that ultimately resolves itself, I think AEW's really been scrambling to kind of figure out where they're going to go. I think they've had to take a bit of a sharp left turn in the last little while, and these are the steps that they're taking to kind of get back onto whatever track they want to. I think, for example, on the men's side, switching the title over to MJF, who I think is going to be a fantastic champion, I think it's too soon. I think they needed to keep the belt on Mox a little bit longer to provide a little bit more continuity, have MJF take a loss, but, courageous heel loss, think Bret Hart, Stone Cold Steve Austin at WrestleMania 13 kind of loss, and, slowly build him up that way to be taken more seriously ultimately as a heel champion. But that's me.
Let me say something on that.
We're going over, and getting over is more important. So that certainly could have been done in that match. Yep.
I was watching the AEW pay-per-view last weekend, and the fans really turned on Moxley, and I thought it was really kind of crude, and they were literally cursing the guy, and the guy's done nothing but deliver very good matches. The guy had personal issues. He always gives 110%. This isn't the guy that deserved to be turned on. And, when you're literally cursing a guy who, puts his heart and soul out there every match, that, at some point, the smart fans sitting in those $500, $600 seats aren't that smart if you're cursing Jon Moxley of all people, okay? If quote unquote Vince is my hero and WWE is my religion, and I'm a smart fan and I get my self-esteem from being a smart fan, it's not that smart, in AEW to attack Jon Moxley of all people. I mean, this just, the guy didn't deserve it. It bothered me. What do you think, Jonathan?
Well, look how hard he worked as a champion. He was on every show, at least every Wednesday show, bleeding on a lot of those shows. I mean, ass-kicking matches, sort of like Jericho's match.
They were literally cursing him. You could hear it.
Well, the MJF is the cool. He's not even a true heel because they're singing. They go out of their minds for the guy.
The MJF thing is weird because I think in terms of the character he plays, I think that he is the closest thing to a pure old school heel in that kind
Piper.
I was going to say in that kind of Roddy Piper vein that we've had in a really long time. That said, I think if you go back 10 years to the Shield era and you talk about Jon Moxley, when they were first breaking him off, to me anyway, it seemed like he borrowed a lot of the Street Fighter angle from Stone Cold Steve Austin and a lot of the more kind of unhinged element of his promos from Piper as well. I mean, there's a through line through all these guys.
They were always cool.
And I agree with you. He didn't. I think Mox is polarizing as a wrestler. I like him. I've always liked him. I buy into the character. The one thing I find with him is I do get concerned that he kind of pushes things a little bit too far, and especially knowing some of the issues that he's had outside the ring. I mean, to me, it always kind of impacts my enjoyment when I know that people are getting hurt for real or when people are hurting themselves for real. I would much rather see people take time off or, have a shorter career or whatever and live longer, happier lives than, end up like Randy the Ram, so to speak.
But here's my point though. Billy Graham was a cool heel. Okay. Some of the fans love Billy Graham, but they didn't curse Bruno. The Piper was a cool heel. They weren't cursing Snooker, okay, or
They
Hogan.
did curse Hogan.
Huh?
And you go to the right card, and they were definitely cursing Hogan. You come
Not
to Maple
early
Leaf
in
Gardens
his career.
back in the day.
Not in the middle of his career. People were
By
nuts.
the end of his first championship run, by the time Hulkamania had run its course,
Okay.
which was still a few years before Hulkamania actually ran its course, crowds really turned on him.
But
The thing with sorry, go ahead.
But there's a line. There's a line where it becomes obsessive. You know, there's no need to go fuck you, Moxley. I mean, there's no need for it.
Well, I'd say with the only chant I think that you need that word in it is the Daniel Bryan's "You're going to get your head kicked in" one.
And remember,
but again, I'm not like
this was the one who came up with the fickle thing, which is what they sort of are now. And yeah, he's a different MJF, different heel. I mean, I've never seen you've seen X amount of fans go nuts for heels, but I don't know.
I like MJF. I think MJF's great, but I'm not going to curse the other guy just out of respect.
That's just the wrestling society we're in now, is that it's not enough to root for your guy. You have to, make an enemy out of anyone that would root for somebody else. And that's the part that I think Evan's getting to.
Didn't you guys have midterm elections like that just recently?
Yeah, we do. Yeah, it's pretty much part of what makes the United States so wonderful. But anyway, we're out of time but
we should do another hour. This is therapeutic.
I know. Well, we'll have you guys back like we always do. Jonathan, can you tell everyone what's going to be on your Wrestling Court article coming up, if you don't give us a preview?
So slamwrestling.net, Wrestler's Court with Jonathan Schwartz. The last one came out just last week. And I basically looked at the NWA's recent decision to appoint Tyrus, of all people, champion. That's right. Your favorite Funkadactyl and mine is now the National Wrestling Alliance World Heavyweight Champion. And it's interesting. I've gotten quite a bit of pushback on that from people who say that I'm just saying it because his political beliefs are somewhat different from my own. I'll acknowledge I don't agree with a lot of what he says on his Fox News show, but I fully support his right and ability to say it. That said, as World Heavyweight Champion, I think it kind of behooves one to make a big tent, as it were, and to try and bring as many people to the promotion and as many eyes on it and as many different kind of viewpoints coming in to watch it as possible. I think, for example, AEW's done a great job of providing an open and welcoming fan base, despite the fact that they're flipping off Jon Moxley. WWE's made strides in that area as well, although, for example, recently hiring back Brian Kendrick seems like a pretty big step back, which may well be the subject of my next column. Tune in to find out. Also, quick shout out in light of comments earlier today. First off, I will pass Evan's kind words along to Greg about Slam Wrestling. Greg Oliver, of course, is the man in charge over there and is kind enough to give me a soapbox to rant on every couple of weeks. And for any of the dozens of people who may be following me here, up in Canada, we have two excellent cancer charities. Canadian Cancer Society, and here in Toronto we have Princess Margaret Hospital, which is a dedicated hospital to helping people who are currently dealing with cancer and their families. Excellent hospital. It's helped a number of people in my circle, and they provide top-notch care to anybody who needs it. So both organizations very much worthy of your support.
Very much in support of that too. All right, Evan, you got any things you want people to pay attention to?
I just want to do a shout out to somebody who doesn't get a lot of credit. His name is Sanjay Mohanta, 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 and he's also from Canada, and just a real supporter of indie artists of all types. He turned me on to some really quality entertainment, all different genres, including Mark Brombacher's The Bloody Baxters, which is an excellent horror short, and Courtney Gilmore, comedian. She has a new CD, Let Me Hold Your Baby, and she is really, really funny. And, there's guys like this, who are involved in the arts and always supporting indie artists who they quote unquote get it, how hard it is to be an indie artist, whatever the genre is. And my mantra is always support indie everything: music, film, wrestling, theater. I just went to an off-Broadway show, my friend Ned Massey's show, and this guy's a brilliant musician. He was discovered by John Hammond Sr., who discovered Springsteen and Dylan. There's so many brilliant artists out there who aren't getting the forum that they deserve. And here's a quick wrestling note. The Wrestling Then and Now movie is going to be available on Tubi, which
Nice.
opens it up to a whole different audience. And we'll be sending out a press release on that very shortly. And etc. So on. Support indie everything, because even the wrestler took 6 years. 6 years to do. 7 years. 350 days took 6 years. So you're talking 13 years between two movies. And really the wrestler was shot on $6 million, which is, like the food budget on the Avengers. It's, people don't realize what a minuscule amount of money that is to make a quality film.
Or like 48 seconds of Black Adam.
Yeah. Black Adam was $180 million. The wrestler was $6 million. Can you imagine? So
don't forget evanginsburg.com.
Yeah. I have a blog that I do on anything and everything,
And a really great holiday story too. I really appreciated the.
Yeah, let me throw that out there real quick. So, parents, take your kids by the hand, visit that elderly grandmother, grandfather, aunt, uncle, neighbor, friend, elderly or sick. It's an important lesson for the kids. And on my blog, I told a little story about my dad taking me to two elderly aunts and what it meant to them. I'm talking 50 years ago. So, it teaches kids a lesson. It's not just about toys and games and presents. Teach the kids empathy and kindness.
It's
really.
a perfect holiday spirit for our listeners. Anyway, we got to go, guys. So thank you so much for being on this week. We'll definitely have you guys back on again. You're really great contributors to the show. Everyone, have a wonderful and safe holiday if we don't see you before then. And good night, everyone.
Happy leftovers.
Thank you.
Leftovers.